Tourists come to the Hocking Hills with wide eyes and packed schedules to see the waterfalls, rock formations, caves, and hike the trails in the state park system. While most cabins are private, some look for something less traveled, away from the caves and parks. There are a few cabins near a quiet pond and a bench near an old sycamore tree. It was late October when Clay came to town. The leaves had already turned, blazing the hills with gold and amber. He checked into one of those little cabins and told the owner, a man named Howard, that he just needed a few days away. Howard was talkative and mentioned he'd only purchased the place recently. Said he'd lost everything in a house fire, everything but a few photos of his late wife. If I didn't have those pictures, he said quietly, I'm not sure that I'd still be here. No one knew why Clay came. Maybe he didn't either. Sometimes people show up in places like this because they're trying not to disappear altogether. The first morning, Clay went down the trail to the pond. The sycamore branches reached down like the arms of a grandmother waiting for a hug. He sat on the bench. The wood creaked softly, like it could feel his burden. He thought about who else might have sat there, what sorrows they carried, what joys they remembered. Two geese glided across the water without fanfare. No splash, no noise, just moving forward. A dragonfly landed on his boot. He barely noticed. His hands were stuffed deep in his jacket pockets. His posture sagged under the weight of something unspoken. Across the pond, a little girl chased a butterfly. Her mother stood nearby with a plaid blanket and a thermos of cider. They laughed, bright, echoing, and alive. Something in their joy tugged at Clay, like hearing your name whispered in a crowd. The girl and her mother made their way around the pond to Clay. The girl carried some wildflowers she had picked on the other side of the pond. She came running up to Clay and handed him the flowers. I saw you from over there, she said, while pointing across the pond, continuing, You remind me of my dad. If he was still here, I would give him these flowers. To the girl, the act gave her some peace, as though she could connect to her dad through Clay. To Clay, he felt a flash of warmth, a feeling he hadn't felt for so long. He came back the next day, brought a book, never opened it. The bench became his quiet ground, a place where the noise that haunted him couldn't follow. One morning, Howard saw him and asked him if he'd help him move a few benches around. I like to shift them every so often, he explained. Sometimes a new view shows you something you didn't notice before. Adding, and sometimes a different bench can become your best friend. Later that day, he told the girl at the coffee shop, That fellow on the trail, he's carrying something heavy. I hope the pond helps him set some of it down. On the third day, Clay watched an older couple set up easels near the water. They painted landscapes together every fall, always returning to the same spots they visited on their honeymoon 50 years before. The woman smiled at Clay. Want to learn to paint? She asked. He shook his head. No, thank you. But he came again the next day, and the next. Each time he stayed a little longer. Each day the burden became a little less painful. Something about the couple was calming. Maybe their quiet rhythm, or the way they moved, talked, and painted like they were molded together without a single crack. Maybe it was their painting. He never said much, never explained what he was carrying in his chest that felt like a bag of stones. But his presence became part of the pond's rhythm, like the heron standing on the far bank, or the ripple of fish below the surface. One morning, he saw Howard on the bench, hunched over a photo, shoulders shaking, obviously crying. Clay kept his distance. The wind picked up, the trees rustled. Then Howard wiped his eyes, stood, and walked away back up the trail. When the wind died down, Clay returned. Soon after, a boy came running down the trail, face red from crying. He stopped at the sight of Clay and sat down beside him without a word. Clay handed him a napkin from his coat pocket. They watched the geese cross the pond in silence. Clay questioned, "Notice how they're moving forward," adding, "We should follow their lead." The boy stood up, wiped his nose, and wandered towards the edge of the pond. Something on the ground caught his eye, a photo. He picked it up, studied it, and brought it back to Clay. Clay took the photo gently, nodded, and walked back to his cabin. A few minutes later, he returned with a roll of tape and a piece of paper. He knelt beside the bench, taping a note to the backrest. "If you're sitting here, wondering if it matters that you're here, it does, more than you know. The world needs people who show up anyway." Then he taped the photo to the bench. It was almost time to leave. He had extended the stay twice, but the road back to wherever he came from was waiting. Still, he made one last trip to the bench. On the trail, he ran into Howard. Howard had such a bright smile, and in his hand was a wood carving tool. Howard didn't explain. He just nodded and headed back to the office. When Clay reached the bench, he stopped short. Howard had carved the words into the wood. "Tomorrow needs you." Clay stared at it. When he saw Howard at checkout, he nodded and said, "Thank you." Howard could see that Clay seemed a little lighter than when he arrived. "I figured someone needed to hear it," Howard said. Clay smiled, not wide, but real. He hadn't found all the answers, but he no longer felt invisible, useless, or alone. Seasons changed. Snow came. Spring followed. Summer bloomed again. People found that bench. Some came in tears. Some come to laugh. Some brought sketch pads. One brought a guitar. The carving remained, weathered now, but clear. Even though Clay left, his presence stayed. In the deer, in the geese, in the dragonflies, in the paintings, in the girl who chased butterflies, in Howard who was grateful for the note, in the boy who sat there when he didn't know how to keep going. Because sometimes just sitting on a bench beside the water is the first step toward staying. Take your time, breathe deep, and know this: tomorrow still needs you. Please share because you never know who needs to hear the message. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to hear more stories from Hocking Hill's Granny. And thank you for staying.